In this demo, I'm going to show a technique called focus stacking, and I'm keeping it simple just by using two images. The idea behind focus stacking is that if you take multiple shots and you blend them together, you'll get a greater sense of depth of field. If you're shooting an image and you even have your aperture at the smallest, it can go f/22 or even smaller if that's possible, you may or may not be able to get the image sharp front to back completely. So the focus stacking technique allows us to achieve the sense of great depth of field. In this image here, you can see that the background here is nice and sharp, and I focused at infinity on this. If we scroll down here though, we notice, and it might be a little difficult to see, but notice how this is not very sharp. It's a little out of focus because it fell out of my plane of focus even at the aperture that I used. So what we want to do is combine multiple images. Here's another image where the background now is out of focus, but I focused closer to the camera, and so now the foreground down below here is nice and sharp. You can see that right here. Okay, so I recommend taking multiple images just to be on the safe side. Pick the ones that seem to fit that criteria that give you the greatest depth of field. And a couple little tips is that obviously you can see there might be a little shift to this, but there's not really much. And the idea is that put your camera on a tripod, and all you're going to do is change the focus from image to image. Exposure stays the same, framing and everything else stays the same. And so the idea is that you're going to take multiple images that focus on different areas or planes in your image. So to do that, you're going to need to set your camera to manual focus so that you can actually change the focus without having to rely on the autofocus capabilities of your camera. So once you've taken your shots, we're going to open them up in Photoshop. You can see here on my example, I have these two images. If you had 4 or 5 images, open all of those up in Photoshop. I use JPEG for this just to keep it simple. Ideally, you're going to use a RAW file because you have that much more information, but it will take longer. So here's the process to focus stack our images. Go under the File menu, and if they're not layered already, this is a quick way to get all your images into one layered document. If you're using Lightroom, you can load your in Photoshop. Sorry, take a step backwards. You can load your images as layers in Photoshop. If they're already open in Photoshop or they're loose files and you're not going through Lightroom, you can use this script and say load files into stack. I'm going to add the open files. If you wanted to, if they weren't open, go browse for them, but I'm going to say add open files. And what I'm going to do is click OK. Bam. So notice I have another document here, and my two images are now layers in Photoshop. You can see there's a slight little shift to that. Not a big deal. We'll take care of that next. So I'm going to select both of these images here in the layers palette. All I did was had one layer selected, hold down the Shift key and click on the last layer. And now they're both highlighted. That means they're both selected. Under the Edit menu, you're going to say Auto Align because we don't want any shifts from one to the other. We're going to Auto Align. And I'm going to put Vignette Removal and Geometric Distortion, but I'm going to leave it set to Auto. Click OK. And Photoshop will magically create aligned images. And they aren't going to be in focus yet, front to back. That's the next step. But for this, we're going to line up the images. And it does do a little distortion here. That was the geometric distortion. But notice when I turn this top layer off, how nothing shifts other than the focus. This is sharp here. Now it's out of focus because we have two different images with two different focus areas. Okay. Again, with these both selected, the next step, Edit, Auto Blend Layers. I'm going to stack images here, seamless tones and colors, and content-aware fill transparent areas. I just keep those checked. You can experiment with or without them. Click OK. And again, Photoshop will do its thing. And one of the things that we'll do at the end is notice how we have these checkerboard transparent areas. We'll go ahead and crop that out and you know, make that nice and clean around the edges. We're getting close. I can feel it. Okay. And so what Photoshop is doing, you know, it's creating, and if you look while it's still doing its thing, okay, now it's done, and deselect that. Here we have this layer here, and it masked it, this layer here, and it masked it. Now it created a merged document or merged image from those two layers. If you didn't want the merged one, you want to go back and edit the masks, you could. But it looks like it actually did a fill in here, and so it gave us, you know, some extra stuff to work with. Meaning it took out that transparent area. But here's the deal. Notice that the image is nice and sharp back here. And if I scroll down, it's still nice and sharp up here. So what we've done is we've combined a couple images in this example and created a greater sense of depth of field from foreground to background. You know, just to do a little cleanup here, I'm going to grab my crop tool. And I'm going to go ahead and crop in a little on there. That side looks pretty good. Crop in the top a bit. You know, and so crop in the bottom even. Cool. And I think just that should do it. I'm just going to check. And there it goes. Boom. So now we have a final image that has our a greater sense of depth of field, foreground, and the background. Again, for focus stacking, ideally, you'll have your camera on a tripod so it doesn't move from shot to shot. You'll have your exposure set and not modified from image to image. And then you will take multiple images with your camera set to manual focus, and you're going to focus on infinity and then work your way forward. Again, taking multiple images just to cover your bases, and then pick the ones that work the best from foreground here to background. And that is focus stacking in Photoshop.